This is Module 1, Creating an Inclusive School Culture for EDL 853 by Tim Walker. So, personal information about me. I've been married to my wife Lorna for 16 years. I have twins, 11-year-old boys, Reed and Preston. Reed is there on the left, Preston is there on the right. They just turned 11 last month, so pretty fun times around here. They are polar opposites of each other, which makes for some great balance for activities and just different interests, and makes for some good variety. Also featured in that photo is our obligatory COVID dog. So over the quarantine we got Roxy. She's a 2-year-old pit mix. We're not working doing education stuff. I can be found doing sports, outdoor sports, scouts. Preston's involved in scouting. Reed is involved in all the sports, so I'm coaching one or supporting one. And then I love doing puzzles and just being outdoors as well. So professional experience, did my undergraduate work at the Emporia State University, secondary business education with a minor in math. Graduate work was at the University of Kansas with my master's in special education and high incidence. I did my doctoral work at the University of Missouri Columbia, go Tigers, and where I studied educational leadership and policy analysis, and my dissertation was around social and emotional learning in secondary suburban schools. My professional teaching experience, I started teaching in 2005 at Harmon High School in Kansas City, Kansas, where I taught 3 different subjects across those years. So I've taught business, math, and special education. Then in 2012, I moved over to Blue Valley and taught emotional disabilities at both Blue Valley North and Blue Valley Southwest, also known as emotional disturbance. I'm sure we'll talk more about that later in this class. And currently at Shawnee Mission South in special education, high incidence, and department coordinator at the high school. Also coach, I've coached boys and girls soccer at all schools. I've worked in 9th grade transition and social emotional learning. So kind of the outline. So I started with the question responses, so responding to the questions based on the articles, then did the article summation, and then some concluding thoughts. So responses to questions. So some definitions. So inclusive culture, I kind of pulled some things together: an environment in which all students are represented, supported, and celebrated both academically and non-academically. So based that on a couple different resources there. Inclusive education is students who are different, whether it's race, gender, ability, socioeconomic learning, are learning side by side. Inclusive leadership is a leader who is accountable, supportive, and curious about how all students are succeeding and learning. So the principal's role for an inclusive culture. So this is taken from a couple different resources there. So to create an inclusive culture, there's the idea of supporting and praising, praise and highlights. So supporting teachers, praising teachers, and highlighting teachers who are doing inclusive things, but also at the same time doing the same thing for students, showing how they're being included and celebrating their successes. The visibility, which is modeling and practices. So I think during professional development, whenever I lead professional development, I try to include ways that I can adjust my instruction or instructional strategy that I use when doing something that I've learned throughout special education, because I just feel like that's where our expertise comes in, as being a master of instructional practices and of what we can bring to the table to differentiate. Communicative, working with all people. So from the lunchroom to the janitors, to the teachers, to the students, to the parents. So really including everybody in that communication, regular communication with large groups, regular communication with small groups. Open. I think listening and learning are 2 things that really stood out to me in the theme for a lot of these articles that we read. So listening to problems, trying to learn more about them if you don't know about it, and then trying to come back to either ask more questions, just find some solutions, and then that leads to the curious, and then looking to improve. So being curious about what's happening, tell me more about what's happening. Why did you do that this time? Or why didn't we do it this time? I think as we embark on this start of becoming leaders, we have to be curious about what's happening, because that can solve a lot of, that can overcome any defensiveness or any other issues that we feel are happening if we're just curious about it. Tell me more about this because I don't understand. So how can we support and advocate? So supporting teachers and students to try new strategies in and outside of the classroom. So also engage stakeholders in committees and events. So that could be from, at my school, we have a committee of where teachers and parents are on a committee. There's like one teacher and a handful of parents. And then we also have like the principal's leadership board that has like stakeholders on there, some parents, community members, and things like that, where they have ways of doing that. Celebrating all learners. I think at my school we do a fantastic job of doing this. We have a couple different awards, whether it's Athlete of the Week. We have Students of the Month, which are done celebrating students who are, it's RISE is what it's called Raider Rise, we're the Raiders. And that's for students who have good attendance, no discipline referrals, and no Fs. So all those students are just placed into a randomizer, and 4 of them are drawn from each cohort, and then they get recognized. And then we also have the Hard Hat Hero, which is a weekly celebration for all staff, both classified and certified. Anybody can be done for that one. And then we also have a culture winner, which teachers award that to other teachers. So that's how we look to celebrate all people. And I think we do a good job of celebrating all learners through that too. It really encourages that. So how do we advocate as leaders? Ensuring all students have a trusted adult in the building. I think that is critical. There's been tons of research in and around students having one trusted adult in the building that they can talk to. Putting others in the focus of policy and procedure. So when we're creating a rule, when we're creating something that we're going to follow as a school, place this student in the middle of it, place this teacher in the middle of it, and see how are we going to apply it in this case, or how are we going to apply it in this case. That way you're working out some of that gray area that may exist. Also being curious how fringe populations are handled and addressed. So looking at your data in and around discipline, in and around grades, tracking, all those sort of things. So looking at how that is, and sometimes just presenting it to people to say, like, this is the data. I don't have an answer for it, but this is the data, and I'm curious to know what more we can learn from this. Plans and strategies. So I think when it comes to creating an inclusive culture, you definitely have to have time to collaborate with various groups, whether it's a horizontal group, so that could be like all freshmen or all 5th grade teachers working together, and then also vertical, so maybe that could be all English teachers, or 4th, 5th, and 6th grade teachers, like one of each of those just kind of working together, but then also cross-curricular, building in time to be purposefully cross-curricular and work together in each of those areas or work together in different spaces, I think is critical. But then also plan how to cover and support teachers who need time to plan and meet regarding students. So obviously with special education, you have IEPs that need to be met, but then also how can we cover those teachers who want to be at an IEP meeting but don't feel like they can get away? How do we cover a teacher who wants to go observe, or how do we cover a teacher who wants to collaborate with another teacher in the building to pull off a lesson? So how can we do those sort of things? Setting time for regular celebrations. So ours are typically done during faculty meetings is when we have one, which are monthly, but then weekly we have some, and then we also have some regular monthly ones as well. And then creating systems for feedback and observation. So whether that's a walkthrough by the administrator or another staff member, just checking off things like, am I seeing evidence of inclusive culture? Strategy. We can strategize on supporting all students and being inclusive by strategize how teachers and stakeholders will support each other. So clearly outlining some ways that teachers can engage with stakeholders to gain support, have their program supported, whether it's financially, with time, or material, things like that. Determining the model of support for students, co-teaching, resource models, embedding in specific ways to support students who are struggling. So I think that is critical, and so strategizing how that's going to work. At our school, we only teach 5 classes in the core, so our 6th class for our math teachers is all RTI, so they do response to intervention. So they go into another math teacher's room, or they go into just a small room and pull out students who may have missed a lot, and they will just reteach them a lesson that they missed. But it doesn't mean that there's more or less planning on that teacher. But also set how teachers will be paired with content and or students. So, looking at how, if we're in a co-teaching model, looking at how we are pairing up our teachers, pairing up our students, so that way you can get the best out of both. Changes and assumptions. So I think how do we combat, how do we elicit change? Is prepare data on students' growth when it comes to inclusion. I think that is huge. One such data point that is now recent coming in with all the Perkins changes is that students who are identified graduate at a higher rate when they're involved in career and technical education classes. At the same time, though, that's some of our lowest numbers. So how do we flip that model and get more students who are identified in career and technical education? Also, I think model simple techniques and strategies to implement in the classroom to support students. I think this is huge. It doesn't always have to be this great, grandiose plan to support students. It could just be something very simple and a small change that can be done. And I think saying that that's okay. Provide time and support to allow teachers to communicate with each other. Again, that's some in that planning. Keep the conversation student focused. There's a lot of things that we can't control. We can't control attendance. We can't control illnesses. We can't control things, but we can control what happens in our classroom that would make that student not want to miss our class, right? So, and that's where that last one comes in, work to control the things you can. You can't control the content, you can't control the standards, but you can control how they're presented. So being sure that we're maximizing those areas that we can control. So article summation, I'm not quite sure if I need to go through all this, but these are all the articles in kind of summary of bullet points. And then my concluding thoughts. So correlation, relevance, and reflection. So thank you so much for doing this. I'll also post the link to the articles or to the PowerPoint as well.